Hello, everyone, and welcome to Valley Homes on TV. I'm Debbie in the Heart Giordano, along with Todd Flesner.
Hey, Deb.
We are your co-hosts on the show. You're watching us on Channel 26, which is public broadcasting TV. You can catch us on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6:30 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday at 9 a.m. So welcome, and we're glad you're with us today.
Great. Well, folks, we're glad to have you with us. I'd like to introduce our guest today.
Please.
Talking about an important issue that folks look at, looking at their future, about their estates. And it's a pleasure to have Bill Mahan with us today. Bill's an estate planning attorney, and he helps make sure that people have their affairs in order. So, Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And we hear you're a regular on TV shows, so you must you're a whiz.
I've done a few before.
Oh, great.
We've got the right guy. We've got the expert here.
So, Bill, we'd like to just kind of start off by introducing yourself and your background, maybe where you were educated and where you grew up.
Sure, yeah. I was born in California, down in Los Angeles. My father was also born in California, so my family's been around here quite a while. I grew up down there in Lancaster. My dad worked in aerospace, so he built airplanes out there in the desert, and that's where I grew up. Then I went to college and graduated from UC Berkeley. That's when I moved to Northern California, and I liked Northern California, so afterwards I worked as a real estate appraiser, went back to Southern California and worked as a real estate appraiser for about 7 years, but always wanted to come back to Northern California, so I decided to go to law school and applied. Went to Santa Clara University, and since then I've been here in San Jose and Milpitas.
You are a local commodity, aren't you?
Well, we're glad to have you with us. So your background really is in working with trusts and helping people with their estates. What all does that entail? Maybe give people a little bit of an overview.
Right. Well, I actually have a master's degree in taxation, so that besides my law school degree, I got another degree after law school in taxation. So my practice is business planning, different kinds of tax planning, and that includes estate planning.
Okay.
So a lot of what I do are things like living trusts and helping people plan their estates, but also even for people who don't need a trust, simple wills and things like that, so that they can set up their estates and have them pass on without too much difficulty, hopefully, to their families.
So that would answer the question, who would be your typical clients? Be those that are in need of estate planning? It
varies a lot. The Silicon Valley has all kinds of people at all different kinds of levels of wealth. So I have some really high-end clients who have large estates. I have many clients who are married couples. The things that usually instigate people to think about estate planning are having their family, their children. They want to make sure things are taken care of for their family. Mm-hmm. So it's commonly married people with children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
People who own assets that would go through probate. We'll talk more about trust and probate in a minute, but if you own real estate, for example, and it's going to go through a probate proceeding, then people are motivated to do a trust for that.
Okay, well, that really brings up a question I had. I've heard that if you own real estate, particularly here in California, that a trust probably is an important instrument that you might consider?
Right. A lot of people think of living trusts as something for the wealthy people, that they need to only have them if they have an estate tax problem. Well, that's not much of a problem anymore because of the increase in the estate tax credits. But people don't realize that if you own assets that go through probate, and probate is the superior court, so after a person dies, their estate has to be processed, and the probate court is where that's done, unless you do something to avoid probate. And the ways you do that are having title in some kind of right of survivorship, or by having something like a living trust, which it's a device where you transfer your probate assets to the trust while you're still alive, and then at your death, because the trust exists, those assets don't have to go through probate court.
Okay, so that answers the question regarding, say, a living trust. Are there many different types of trusts, or is that the one document that you use, the living trust?
No, for estate planning, that's the primary document, but there are many, many types of trusts out there. There's even trust accounts at the bank. People open what are called payable on death accounts. Those are trust type accounts, but they're basic, simple trusts. But also for individual people, there are things like gifting trust, where perhaps grandparents will set up a trust for their grandchildren and they'll transfer some assets in that to help pay for education or whatever. That's called a gifting trust. There are other kinds of irrevocable trusts that people set up to transfer assets to other people. There's something called an irrevocable life insurance trust that people do to fund with life insurance policies and take the life insurance out of their estates for tax reasons and things like that. So there's all different kinds of trusts.
Sounds complicated.
There's a lot of trusts. There's also charitable trusts. People set up charitable foundations and charitable trusts.
I could be a charitable trust.
There you go.
My name on there.
Well, I want to come back to this issue about probate. I mean, are there reasons why people might consider, avoiding probate? Is it, in looking at a trust? 'Cause I know there's some costs of setting up a trust, but
Right. The cost of setting up a trust is typically far less than a probate would be for the same estate. There's lots of benefits to avoiding probate. There's some reasons why people actually probably should have probate, but for the most part, if you can avoid it, it takes approximately a year to get through probate court. So there's a year of time that you're involved in some kind of court proceeding. It's also relative.
And that could tie up the assets so it can't be disposed of or liquidated, and could be very problematic, I would imagine.
Well, the assets can be disposed of, but you have to do it through some kind of court proceeding. So it's a very technical, you can do it, but it has to be done, according to the rules. So it takes longer, but you don't have to wait for the estate to close to sell something. It's more formal and more complicated. But it's also, besides taking the time, which I really think is the worst thing about it, it's public. So people who want to see what you owned and what it was worth and who you left it to, they can do that, and they do that. They go down to the clerk's office, and it's called prospecting. They go through the probate files to see that. With a living trust, it's private. People don't know what you owned or who you left it to or anything about them. The other thing is probate is somewhat expensive because it's based on a percentage of the gross assets. So it's basically like a commission. So if you have $1 million house with a $900,000 mortgage, it's not a $100,000 probate asset, it's $1 million probate asset. And the probate fees are based on a percentage of that, so there'd be tens of thousands of dollars for probate fees. All of which can be minimized and avoided if you have a trust. You still have to pay for the trust, and there's something called trust administration that has to be done after a person dies. But typically, the costs are maybe 25% to a third as much as a probate would be for the same estate, without the delays and without the public knowledge of the estate.
Okay.
good. So, you talked about also this other way of owning property, rights of survivorship. What are some of the benefits of that?
And I might add, too, that's the common questions that my clients have when they go into the title company to take title, and the buyers, they're referred to an attorney if they want to get some advice on how to hold title. So what do you recommend?
Well, holding property with right of survivorship, the most common way is something called joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And what that means is that a group of people, 2 or more people, own property together, and because it's with right of survivorship, if a party dies, then the other surviving owners own the property after that, so that interest just goes away. So because of that, it also doesn't go through probate. So that's one way of avoiding probate, but it doesn't really work as well as people think it might, because people don't necessarily die in the right order. So if you add your children to your house with right of survivorship and they die before you do, you haven't accomplished anything as far as passing it on. The other way of taking title is something called community property with right of survivorship. That's intended obviously for married people or same-sex couples who can qualify under community property laws. And what that means is that they own the property not as joint tenants but as community property, which is a different way of owning property for married couples. And they still have right of survivorship. So that's not really a bad way for married people to own their property if they don't have a trust or something else like a will.
Okay.
Oh, good. So now I got this question the other day from a client of mine. There's a piece of inherited property. The parents had passed away, and there was a loan on it. And most loans have a due-on-sale clause, right? So what happens if someone passes away and there's a mortgage there? Can the bank come after that?
That's a great question.
What happens?
Well, there's 2 parts to that. One is what can happen, and the other is what does happen.
Right.
The kind of clause you're talking about, due on sale, is sort of a vernacular term for something called an acceleration clause. There's different types, but what they basically say is that if something happens, the lender can accelerate the loan and make you pay it off. So their due on transfer clauses or due on sale clauses would mean that if the property changes ownership, which it does if when a person dies, that if that clause is in there and if it's worded in a correct way, the lender could elect to accelerate the payoff of the loan and not let the mortgage remain on the property. As a practical matter, it just about never happens. People, if they keep paying the mortgage after the deceased owner died, the lender is probably not that concerned about as long as they're getting paid. It's more of a concern if the interest rates are rising, because the lenders would like to get low interest loans converted to higher interest loans, and so that's really why those clauses, I think, evolved and became part of these contracts. But with interest rates being low and not rising much, it's just, in my experience, it has come up a few times. If you contact the lender and ask them about it, they'll probably look into it. They may or may not, but it's an election they have. It's not like it's illegal to do it, to continue to keep that mortgage and pay it. There's nothing illegal about it. It's simply a contractual provision that allows the lender to elect to accelerate the loan if they want to. But as a practical matter, it really doesn't happen.
That's typically what I see as well.
Let me
As long as
ask-
lender's being paid, they're happy.
Let me switch gears and let's talk back again about the estate. What kind of issues could arise with multiple surviving children, and/or how can some issues be avoided? It's always up.
If you have brothers and
always-
sisters, you probably...
Always going to be a problem, I imagine. You laugh. I'm sure you have stories to tell.
Well, sure. I mean, there are many stories. What I've found, I've been practicing for 35 years, so I've done this quite a while. And I found that you don't usually have too many problems with siblings while the parents are living, the mom and or the dad, because people sort of just, whatever they might be feeling, they sort of keep it to themselves. But once both parents are gone, all the siblings see themselves as equal, and oftentimes in families that hasn't been the structure, in other people's minds. So if problems are going to arise, that's when they're going to happen, because people are going to assert themselves. So it's sort of the human nature, I think, normal sibling relationships. So what you can do about that as a parent is when you write your estate plan, it should be written in a way that tries to minimize those kind of problems. So you make it as clear as you possibly can. If you're leaving your estate equally to your children, that almost never results in a lot of fighting, because it makes sense. It doesn't really, it's not something that should create a lot of controversy. So it doesn't. But if you're doing something other than that, where you're leaving particular properties to particular people, or a higher percentage to one than another, or just anything that is sort of deemed to or perceived to be unfair, then there's a lot greater chance for difficulty with the children. So that, I think, is best addressed just by good, strong drafting, making it very clear to people. Sometimes people even have family meetings before people die, where they try to work that all out so people understand what the reasoning was. You don't have to do that, but some people choose to do
So
that.
I would suspect your role as an attorney in that process, with all your longevity of experiences, you're able to, kind of offer some guidance to some,
Sure.
to let the parents know and
Sure. One of the
situation
things I really try to talk people out of is when I have clients who come to me and they want to leave property A to this child, property B to that child, and property C to a third child. Because I tell them, well, first of all, that's automatically going to be unequal. There's no way those three properties are going to be of equal value.
Correct.
And then there may be mortgages against some and not against others. You might sell one before you die. There's all these different potential things that can happen that will completely mess that up. So I don't tell them they can't do that, but I really try hard to talk them out of it. So they'd be better off doing it in percentages or some way that can be worked out without being specific to a particular piece of property.
Good. Well, I hear that there's been some I guess trial balloons floated recently about some changes perhaps to inheritance taxes, step-ups in basis, and without getting into the probability of those things happening, kind of what's the playing field right now in terms of inheritance taxes and
Right. But under the federal law, we have what's called the estate tax. And that's moved around a lot over the last 10 years. I mean, there's something called an estate tax credit, and that's the amount of property that you can leave to anybody. It doesn't have to be a child or a spouse. It can be anybody, but that's the portion of your estate that will pass tax-free at your death. Well, that credit amount has changed dramatically up and down over the last 10 years. We had 1 year when it was no estate tax at all for 1 year.
I believe that, and famously that's when George Steinbrenner passed away
that year.
Right. Yep.
That's the case everybody knows.
Right.
Now we have a credit amount that's I think 5.43 million this year. It's gone up a little bit again. So that's the amount. That's a lot of property. So for obviously the vast majority of people, that's a lot more value in a state than they actually have. So that means that for all intents and purposes, most estates are going to pass tax-free. So that's fine. But as you mentioned, we've recently had proposals to change some of the tax laws. They aren't particularly related to the estate tax credit, but things like not increasing the basis of property when people die, so you have a new income tax basis, what's called a stepped-up basis, so that you don't avoid capital gains because of that when people pass away. Well, as you say, that probably won't pass Congress, but it shows you that Congress has the ability to change these rules at any point in time that they decide to do it. So the estate tax credit has moved up and down a lot. It's quite high now. But estate planning should be drafted to try to be flexible with that, so that regardless of what the credit is, you might be able to still do your estate planning based on what's best at the time.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit deeper about the tax implications. So can properties be rented out as opposed to just sold, and how would that enter into the the tax situation?
So you mean that after someone dies, instead of selling it, you keep it?
Correct.
Sure. What I also try to talk people out of doing is ever saying in their trust, you must sell this property after I die, or you can't sell this property after I die, because what that's doing is it's really limiting the discretion of the trustee who's ever in charge, and the real estate market is, when the person writes that, is completely unknown. So you should definitely try to avoid saying that. So what you want to do, if possible, is leave the decision about selling or keeping to the discretion of the trustee. That trustee is the person in charge of the trust, so after you die, you'd have a successor trustee who would take over. And probably also the family who would have their input into that. But if the family wants to keep property rather than sell it, the trustee should have the discretion to do that, and then the property would be distributed to the beneficiaries, so they would become the owners of the property. So of course, if they own it, they can do what they want with it. They can live in it, they can rent it, they can pretty much do anything they want, but they will also have gotten a new basis when the person died, so when they rent it, they'll be able to depreciate it.
Okay.
So each family should have that ability, and
Okay.
you know, sometimes you have an estate that's mostly a one piece of real property, and somebody wants to keep it and somebody wants not to keep it. Well, you can usually work that out as well, where they either trade assets so that one gets the house and the other one gets something else, or you can even have a buyout agreement between them where they buy the difference.
Right, and that's something I'm working with a client on right now is passing that property within the estate. One of the siblings wants to keep it, the others would like to have the proceeds of that, and so it's not an uncommon thing for folks to deal with. How do they equalize that?
Especially in the valley where we have properties that are really valuable, they can be the largest asset in the estate very, very easily.
Well, good. Well, I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but the field of estate planning is pretty complex, and really, individual needs vary with that. What sort of questions should someone be asking if they're looking for an estate planning attorney?
Well, the first thing they should be looking for, and this is my bias, but it's also true, they should be looking for an attorney. Because a lot of estate plans are drafted by people who aren't attorneys, and they're invariably not very good. And the reason for that is because it's a pretty complex area. You have all these different rules of tax law and probate law and all kinds of law that overlap. And so a person should be an attorney in order to understand those things and to be able to design the estate plan to work correctly for the particular family. And then I think amongst attorneys, there's also a great deal of variation. You need to look for people with experience, because the more experience you have, the more you're able to understand and to do things for them. So I think those are the questions you should ask. You should ask, if you interview an attorney, how long have they been doing estate planning? What kind of estate planning have they done? Have they been all the way through an estate? In other words, not just the drafting of an estate, but when the person passes away.
You call that administration?
It passes on to the family. Maybe estate tax returns, have they dealt with that? Because these are things that all matter, and I think experience is important.
That's wise. So it's just not taking the attorney's advice up front, but needing that the full gamut, the full spectrum there.
Right. I think the more experience the attorney has had in all of these different areas, the better they're able to look at a situation and figure out what's the best way to deal with it.
Great. Well, we are out of time. This has been a great interview. I love it, hearing about this. It's an important topic. Anybody that owns real estate and needs some advice like that. So, Bill, would you like to offer your contact information if anybody would like to reach you?
Sure. You can reach me by phone at my office. That's area code 408-288-8100, and then it's a law firm, so you would ask for me. You could also reach me by email. That's wdm@gedlaw.com.
Terrific. Well, Bill, you've been a wealth of information for folks this afternoon. Hopefully it's sparked some questions that people might ask for themselves and for their estates. And again, thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure.
Good luck with your business.
Thank you. You too.
We served our country like those before us.
The camaraderie is what kept me going. You know, it was a dangerous area. All of Vietnam was dangerous.
I didn't know what to expect when I got back.
For the first 10 years after I got out, no one would have known that I was in the service.
I got home, got married 2 weeks later, got a job.
We came back, built lives, families, and communities, but we still had challenges.
The carnage of war left an indelible mark on me.
I would have intrusive thoughts. They're horrible nightmares.
Services and support that can help are available for veterans.
I went to the VA, talked to my doctor.
I started doing groups. I started doing one-on-one counseling.
We found ways to move past these challenges for ourselves and for our families. At MakeTheConnection.net, you can hear our stories and find tools and services available to you.
The more I talk to people, family, friends, other vets, the better I feel.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Valley Homes on TV. I'm here with Debbie Indahar Giordano with Todd Flesner, and we're going to be doing January 2015 market wrap-up. Happy New Year, I guess.
Yeah, Happy New Year. There's been a lot happening in the news with real estate, and I see that you've got some clippings there.
I got some clippings there. Let's start with taking the emotion out of selling your home. Here's 10 quick tips on how you're supposed to do that. Number 1, trust your agent. Number 2, eat well. What does that have to do? Get plenty of sleep. Take time for yourself. Stop looking at your home as yours. So in other words, you got to look at it. You got to detach from it. Talk when you need to. So live in reality. Sellers sometimes also have unrealistic view of how much their home is worth. Take a cooling off period. If an offer's been made, maybe take a little bit of time to think about it. You don't have to react too quickly. Be patient with buyers, and there are many, many of those. And then keep your eye on the prize, and that'll keep the emotion out of selling your home. So, California housing market forecast. I thought it was really interesting that the affordability index has really shifted in the state of California. Generally, 2011 it was at 53%. We are now down in 2015, beginning at 27% affordability, and I think we're seeing that with.
So that's a percentage of the population that could go out and afford to buy a new home today.
Right. But it obviously hasn't changed the housing price structure, because last week there are headlines in the San Jose Mercury News is Bay Area home prices surge, and that is the case. I just had an open house this weekend, 75 groups through. In fact, you were talking about your clients in Campbell with 150 groups through, and this home sold for $90,000 over the list price. So it's just crazy right now.
It is a hot market. The inventory is limited. And folks with the very low interest rates that we have, we're down to in the all-time low area again. That's made the affordability index a little bit better.
Let's talk about rates real quick, and then I'll do the housing snapshot.
I'm in the threes. Conforming loans 3.625.
Oh my gosh.
Jumbo loans 3.875 up to $1.5 million with 20% down. You can get a jumbo loan in the threes.
Terrific.
Fixed for 30 years.
Terrific.
It's outstanding.
Great.
So. Needless to say, it's busy in my office these days. The phone's ringing, not only with people who want to buy, but refinancing as well. People are having there's a good window of opportunity here for folks.
I'm glad you took a minute out to do this show, because it wouldn't be very fun without you. So let's talk about what's going on in the city of Milpitas. Back in November of 2013, we had an average home price in Milpitas of $718,000 and a median price of $650,000, and that has changed to an average price of November 2014 of $802,000 and median price of $792,000. So what's that? That's a good.
That's almost $100,000.
That's a good $100,000, yeah, and that's about what I'm seeing. The condos. In November 2013, we looked at an average price of $471,000 and a median price of $434,000, and that has now changed to an average price of $581,000 and a median price of $582,000. So obviously, economy's up, jobs are up. Milpitas is a great place to work, live, play,
absolutely,
and own a home.
It is. No, it's the environment is good. We're seeing the economy is coming back, and there's more confidence, as you talked about jobs, and we've talked about that issue here on the show before, being an important part of our local market and our local real estate market. And
right.
It's a good environment right now.
It's great. And tell folks that we have a title officer coming to do our show next, and we can talk about title and escrow and all those major components of a transaction. So looking forward to interview Eric with Chicago Title.
That'll be good, because that's we have this whole vocabulary in real estate, and so I'm sure that we'll learn a little bit of vocabulary when we talk with Eric.
So if folks have any questions or any topics you'd like to see on the show, you can email me at giordanodj@aol.com. And Todd, how can folks reach you?
Email tflesner@opusadvisors.com.
Great. We'll see you in a couple weeks.